Next item, please.
Special reports, 30-year study update, Fielding International.
And Mr. Wall will come up and introduce our presenters.
As the board recalls, back in March, April timeframe, we were looking at a possible bond issue. We wanted to take a step back and have a consultant come in and look at a long-term study for us for our infrastructure. Through that process, we did an RFP over the summer. And through that process, the board recommended and the administration recommended Fielding International to run that process. So they've been working with us since September, at the end of September, and they've had a lot of meetings. So here's their time to kind of update in the public and to the board on their process and where they're at right now. So I'll let them introduce themselves as they speak.
Good evening, trustees. I'm James Seaman with Fielding International. I'm here with Jesse Stickler-Lipson. Fielding International is a planning and design firm. We design and focus just on school projects. We work all around the country and even around the world. We've been working with the district now for several months. We are really in the middle of this process right now. We have conducted our discovery phase of the project, and the next piece is that we would really be getting into the analysis piece of it. So we're going to give you an update on where we are at, and afterwards we'd be happy to take any questions you have. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jesse here to give the update.
Thanks so much, James, and thanks for having us here this evening. We already went ahead and did introductions, so I'll skip forward to the agenda. As you can see, we have a pretty streamlined agenda, so we'll talk about where we are in a little bit more detail, what we've heard so far from the community, what this means for our work moving forward, a few next steps, and then, as James mentioned, some time for questions and discussion. So the objectives here are really to provide an update on, again, where we are in the master facility planning process, and then share what we've learned to date and how that'll impact and inform our next steps together. So where we are coming out of the discovery and visioning phase 1, and we're moving into this phase 2, which we're calling planning for the future. And what that does is really start to compile all of the data that we've gathered during phase 1 into an intuitive framework so we can make decisions and start planning for scenarios for how to organize the master plan moving forward. So you'll see that we're in we're in January, so we're in this kind of light yellow color, and we're about halfway, a little more than halfway through our process together. So what we've heard, who we've heard from, we hosted a series of workshops, which we called the Future of Learning workshops in November when we were here, and we were really happy with the turnout. So we hosted 29 focus groups, and we heard from a variety of stakeholders, so district leadership, administrators, parents, students. We've met with some of you. We had that opportunity, and various city and community members. And we had 462 participants, so really excited for that number of people to turn out and support this work. And 200 students participated in that engagement. So elementary, middle, and high school students, we were able to go into the schools and meet with all of those students. So that was really, really hopeful and great. And then since then, we were able to conduct a survey. So with the help of district leadership, we heard from 1,830 community members, including parents and guardians, students, staff, community members again. We were again really pleased with that turnout. And we were able to also get into all of the schools. So 33 total school visited. And we were able to talk with school leaders and talk with them and interview them about what they saw for the future of Dearborn Public Schools, what they wanted to see for the vision of that learning, and then what was also getting in the way in terms of their facilities, and so how we could help them moving forward. And so what were our main takeaways? Well, really, the vision and priorities were consistent among those various stakeholders. So that was really, really hopeful and exciting for us, that among these various engagements, the themes that rose to the top were were consistent between all of the walks, all of the interviews that we did, all of the people that we spoke with. We heard that people were excited about the opportunity to bring Dearborn Public Schools into the future. So that was consistent. Dearborn is an incredibly strong community, so that was something that kept rising to the top. But there are certain barriers in facilities that are getting in the way, and so that's why we're really all here together talking today. And there's a desire to balance this tradition and innovation. There's a rich history here in Dearborn in terms of community and facilities, and so we want to make sure to honor that with our work moving forward. And so what else did we hear in terms of those priorities for the future? One student in a middle school focus group, I believe, said they just needed some space to breathe. So there's this tension and there's a desire that we heard often between teachers and students that they just need a little more space, a little bit more room. And that's really critical because an increased amount of space helps for a variety of different sorts of learning activities to be able to take place. And so that's something that we heard loud and clear, and a theme, again, that consistently rose to the top. Hands-on and workshop-based learning, meaningful, relevant, real-world learning, the idea of differentiation, so being able to meet students where they are is important. And then themes of flexibility, variety, and agility were also consistently coming to the top when we spoke with teachers, students, and community members. And so we're excited about the opportunities coming out of all of these stakeholder engagements. Questions came up for us, and some questions directly from you all. So how might we inspire students? How might we create public partnerships and public-private partnerships moving forward? How might we honor Dearborn's rich history and community pride? Leverage cultural diversity and community assets? How might we graduate the biggest workforce in the state of Michigan? How might we create the conditions for collaboration between learners, educators, and community partners? So those are all items that we're exploring as we move forward and explore the scenarios and ways to organize the district. So what does this mean for our work as we continue to move forward? So this diagram, some of you may have seen in the past, but it's how we typically approach our work. So we typically approach our work by designing and constructing this learning ecosystem, which takes the vision for learning, so the goals, desires, and student outcomes, and we design that and discover what that means in terms of the educational program, so how that vision is delivered, along with the environment, so the physical space, technology, furniture, and culture. And we believe that aligning all three is really what creates the conditions for students and learners to be able to thrive. And so this is really showing a bit of our process. We work to create and to craft what we call these design drivers, so you see in yellow. And we do this through taking all we've learned from this discovery process and starting to craft and build out these design drivers. And design drivers are really meant to articulate what the core belief for the future of learning is and what that can be. We started to create that together through a workshop with district leadership and general administration when we were here in November. And then our team took that and continued to build out what that could look like in terms of the physical environment and teaching and learning. And so that's what you see here in blue and in pink. And from here, we'll take that and start to build out design scenarios or approaches for how we might organize the district and craft the scope and timeline for what the master plan can be. And these design drivers can also be used as a metric to really measure what the final recommendation for the master plan can be. And so these are the design drivers that we started to craft together with leadership when we were here, and that we continued to build out. And then we started to craft them and finalize the language. It presented back to the district leadership. And this is where we landed and where we are currently. So students, prioritize a student-centered mindset. Inspiration, invite inspiration and excitement. Community, cultivate belonging and reflect community identity. Collaboration, foster collaboration. resilience, create dynamic and resilient systems and structures. Wellness, promote physical, social, and emotional health and wellness. And safety, ensure safety and security. So we're using these 7 design drivers that you see on the screen to craft and shape the scenarios for Dearborn Public Schools moving forward. So what does this mean for next steps? We briefly touched on this, but so we're compiling and analyzing all of this data into this dashboard and framework to make decisions to move forward. And we're developing these scenarios. So when we talk about scenarios, we really mean these high-level design approaches for the scope and the timeline for the master plan to understand how to prioritize the projects and the needs for what we want to do. And then we'll socialize those in a series of community forums in early February. And we'll hear more about those. The district will talk about those in terms of times and dates in the next week or 2. So that's all we have in terms of a presentation, but we're open and excited about questions and discussion.
Do any of the trustees have questions? Trustee Petlishkoff.
Yeah. In the visioning of all of this, we have a couple of pieces. One is that the district has a wide variety of aged buildings, from 100 years to much newer buildings. First, we're looking at how we're utilizing our space, I'm assuming, and what's in the best interest of getting the best educational design features. But it wouldn't all look equal in every building because every building is in different condition and has different opportunities. We also have financial constraints. And we're not talking about we knock everything down and build it all new so it all does look equal. We're also, so we have to work within our resources available and what we can do to fit what the vision is for what the educational future should look like with the space designs available. How are you going to blend all of those variables in order to be equitable across the district?
Yep, that's a great question. Thanks for that. So what we're starting to do is we're taking all of the data that we have, and that includes the report that was given to us that was done before in order to make and bring all of the facilities up to the standard working condition that they need to be. And so to your point, that's not necessarily equal for all of the facilities because all of the facilities are in different states. And so that is one data point in this sort of framework that in database that we're building out. And so that's one column, if you will, of what that condition would be. And that has a certain different dollar amounts associated with it. And then another layer or another column, let's say, is enrollment projections. So there's a utilization analysis that's being done based on a set of enrollment projections and what the capacity for the building is. So there's different data points that are going into this framework so we can understand and evaluate the needs for each building in order to best prioritize what those needs are and the different amounts and weight that dollar amounts can start being attributed. And that's what we can start socializing and sharing with you and with the community so everyone can understand what those needs are. Now the education piece is really important, and that's kind of where and why we came in that Mr. Wall was talking about in the fall. And so that's a big part of this piece. And so what we shared just now was what we heard about what that educational vision really is for Dearborn. And so that'll play a big role in terms of that prioritization.
Well, it looks like we still have a ways to go.
Yes. Well, one thing to add to that too is it definitely is going to look different at the different schools. And so one way that we explore that is through what we call design patterns. We actually did a workshop during the engagements, community engagements, where we explored design patterns with the community. And really, these are ideas that tie to sort of the educational activities and experiences that are desired for students. And so those patterns will be part of the report, part of the master planning as suggestions for how you would renovate facilities, or if you are creating new facilities, it's important to include these design patterns. They may look different, how they are, how it would be at a older school versus a newer school, but the idea that the design pattern, it really solves a problem. It provides an opportunity to support certain teaching and learning activities. So it may look different, but at least those elements would be there. So as far as from kind of an equity standpoint, they would have similar types of patterns throughout. They just may look differently at the different
Okay.
schools.
And you feel that you're able to communicate that with the different school environments? Because everybody's going to be looking, saying, well, how come they're getting A, B, and C, and we're only getting D and E?
Yeah, once you bring it to these patterns, the idea is that really all of the schools would have these types of patterns. They just may look differently. So we'd be able to point out and say that, you know, they include those different patterns. And really they tie to those design drivers. So those design drivers that we shared, those 7, those are important that, as Jesse was saying, when we go to evaluate any of the scenarios or options, we want to make sure that everyone would include these 7.
So it's
these
kind of a
7 drivers.
universal
Right.
goal.
Right, exactly. So that way, you know, every school would need to have these 7 things. And these were really developed working with leadership. You know, it was really synthesized from all of the data that we got from the participants. And we spent a lot of time with leadership to make sure that these are right for your district.
Okay, thank you.
Trustee Watts?
A comment, not a question, and I just wanted to thank you because I did come to one of the sessions and I saw some of the drawings that you had inside here, and I was pleasantly surprised by how forward-thinking the design was for the futuristic classroom. And I think it took and kept in mind all of the various different type of learners for our students. So those that need to move versus those that probably just need to sit still and can stay at the desk for very long. And I personally was happy to see the various types of modules as well, so that it could be moved based on whatever that day was. Maybe a teacher says, you know, maybe this format is not working, let's go ahead and switch it up. So I appreciate all of the options that you guys had offered, and within that sort of framework, the options within each one of those photos. So I just want to say thank you for the forward thinking that you have presented to us.
Good, I'm glad you were able to see that.
Any additional comments? Trustee Barry?
Yeah, thank you for the update. How difficult would it be, like if we go to the survey outreach, 1,830, that's a good number, to break that down, percentages of parents, students, staff, and somehow, some ways, either summarize or get some of the responses? I'd be interested to hear from what the parents and the community members and the staff are thinking.
Yeah, it's not difficult. I don't know all of the numbers off the top of my head.
Sure,
I
no, I'm
believe
not
it's-
saying, of course not tonight.
Yeah, we can get that
Follow
for
up
you.
with
I believe 65% were parents.
Okay,
That's one number that stuck out to me.
okay.
But yeah,
Yeah, it's a follow-up report,
Yep.
that's what I'm looking for. So appreciate it, thank you.
sure.
President Thorpe.
Trustee Moses?
One of the major objectives of this study is to estimate the end of life of buildings. Will the final report will it have that data of saying this is when we think that the building should be torn down or rehabbed?
Yes, so what we're doing is we're developing what's called a facility condition index. And what that does is it really, it takes into consideration the report that we were mentioning earlier, the facility condition assessment that was done previously. And it develops a score, and that's based on, it's really 2 scores. So how the building is now in terms of where it ranks, and then a few years out. And so looking at that, it helps us make a determination of what to do with the building. And so one of those decisions would be whether or not it makes more sense to tear the building down or not tear the building down, just in terms of a value proposition.
One other variable too, there's a lot of pieces to this in making a decision, so it's not, I'll just say it's not a simple quantitative thing where we say if the number is this, it means you tear down a building. There's a lot of factors in
Right.
play. A big factor is sort of the historic and community significance of a building as well. And so we take all of that into consideration too. So it is definitely a quantitative and a qualitative assessment. And depending on the scenarios, there may be different, we will show different options to it. And depending on how the scenarios would work, there may be, it's not like we'll have a list of buildings that should be torn down. In one scenario, it may recommend a certain recommendation for buildings to be replaced, and in another one, it may recommend some other ones. So there would be kind of a range of options that meet the criteria of the scenarios.
Okay, thank you.
Trustee Barry?
Yeah, just to follow up to Trustee Mosip's question, when you say a few years out, what does that mean? Are we looking at short-term, long-term? And I'll give you a reason why I'm asking that question, because maybe for the last 10, 12 years, I can think of one building where we keep adding $4.5 million here, $6 million here, then major repairs on mechanical. At what point, somebody should have said, hey, wait a second.
Yeah, I believe there are different methodologies of doing it, so we have to agree on one, but I believe currently we're looking at now and then 3 to 6 years. But anything beyond 7 years, we're not looking at this moment.
3 to 6 years.
And we'll confirm that moving forward.
Okay, great, thank you.
Trustee Watts?
One of the options you were saying, is that an option for a repurpose? So say, for instance, the building currently, as it's being utilized, is not in the future conducive, but is there an option to reutilize it into something else?
Yes, so we would be looking at those scenarios, and we've been starting to think about some of those things, because you do have buildings that, some really amazing buildings in the district here. And so if we find that if it's too costly and too difficult to adapt to the types of learning spaces, it may make sense to adapt it into some other type of use for the community.
And then follow up with Trustee Barry had said, you had said that it would be projection of 3 to 6 years. Could we get a 6 to 10 year? Could we get a decade?
Overall, this is really, we're calling it's a 30-year master plan. I think really the shorter time frame is really just looking at a specific facility, but we are looking holistically
Okay.
at this, because it is going to take, whatever recommendation we do here, it's going to take, many years to build everything out. It's probably a decade plus to just build things out. And then by the time they're operating, this is really going to be a plan for the district for the next 30 years.
Okay, that's what I was thinking. So we have the short and the long-term
Yes,
longitudinal
yeah.
study. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Sorry for that. Thanks for the clarification. The 3 to 6 year is for the facility condition index specifically, which is just a more of an industry standard typical assessment, but the overall master plan is a more of a long-term look.
Trustee Petlicoff?
And just to tag on to the conversation about some of the more historic buildings that are also the older buildings, do you have access to preservationists who can help discuss ways that we could still maintain buildings of significance in the community while renovating them in some fashion that would provide, I do know that there are many in this community who are very invested in and we're the home of Greenfield Village. I mean, there are things that we want to make sure that we don't just obliterate from our history.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yes, we would, when it comes time to get into more of the specific approaches and uses, our work as a master plan is going to be at a little bit of a higher level. But once we start to identify, a certain building perhaps that maybe, wants to be repurposed or something, but still keeping the historic piece, yes, at that point, historic preservationists and experts would be employed at that point to come in and help
Okay,
with that work.
thank you.
Any additional questions? Trustee Barry?
No question, just a comment. I truly respect historic buildings and, history and preservation. I enjoy studying history, but at the same time, we're looking like at, further down the road here. What is 2050? What is education going to look like? What is the classroom going to look like? What are the hallways going to look like? So it's gonna be on you to think outside the box. Dearborn, it's traditional, very conservative. We love our old buildings. We truly do. But at the same time, we're looking to hear from you that, yeah, we respect this, but what's in the best interest of students and student success is what I'm kind of looking for, so.
Yeah, just to address that point, it's a really good point. And really, the diagram that Jesse was showing where it showed the vision, the bubbles on top, it's really part of this. It's really a learning ecosystem that we're looking at here. And it's really important to start with that vision. And so a lot of the engagements that we did during the discovery and visioning was around talking about the future and listening to your community about what they feel is the future. We bring a lot of examples. So we work on schools all around the world, and so we can bring examples of what's happening in other countries and other parts of this country even. And so we shared a lot of those ideas. Trustee Watts mentioned the diagrams and the pictures that we were showing. Those are all examples of kind of best practices that are happening. And so part of that process is really visioning, because if you're looking 30 years, you got to think about the future. You got to think about the vision. And so we spend a lot of time doing that to really understand the goal, understand where we're going, and then that way, when we develop scenarios, we're thinking with that end in mind.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation.
Great, thank you.